It's Tuesday, and it's 2:30 Mountain Time, 4:30 Eastern Time, which means we are kicking off another Domo Lunch and Learn. These Lunch and Learns are provided to you by the community here at Domo to give you support and to help you in all things that is happening inside your instance. And this one is one that I think a lot of folks are going to be interested in. We're going to kind of briefly touch the surface of governance and kind of dive in to those users, roles, and group managements, talk a little bit about content. I am joined by this guy to my left on your screen, Carl Altern. Really appreciate you, buddy. Thank you so much for jumping on and giving our users an opportunity to learn more from you. He is a first-time guest. We'll go easy on him today. If there is anything that comes up during the session that you would like answered or asked, please do so in the comments and chat section. As always, really excited about this. I think governance is something, as you know, Carl, that gets talked a lot about when folks set up their instances. How do they assign roles? Who gets assigned what? How they get assigned? How are we attributing those roles? Where can I put them in groups if I need to? So it's going to be a really interesting session, and I'm really excited for all of our users out there in the Domo sphere to learn more. So really appreciate that. As always, folks, ask questions in the comments and chat. I'll let Carl do a brief introduction about himself, and then we'll share his screen, and we will jump right in to best practices for delivering content in Domo with a focus on Domo instance governance. So appreciate it again. Thank you, Carl, for joining us.
And thank you for the introduction, Eddie, and thanks again for having me. I think it's been a long time coming, me joining you here, and I'm just really excited to be sharing some of my learnings around governance with our users. So a bit of a background on myself. My name is Carl Altern. I lead data governance here at Domo. I've been employed at Domo for about the past 5 years, and in this role that I'm in now for just under 2. So a lot of my time is spent working with Domo's customers, understanding their governance challenges, working through those challenges with them and resolving them with them. And then also part of it will be taking the feedback that they have around the product from a governance perspective and relaying that onto the product team. So what I'm going to be sharing with you today is really some of the fundamentals of governance in Domo related to user management, roles, groups, and content delivery. Content delivery is critical to get right, especially at the beginning, because doing so is going to set you up on a good foundation for easily delivering and distributing and sharing your content to your users in such a way that it doesn't increase in the administration workload for your system administrators or Domo administrators. So that's going to be the focus today. So I am sharing my screen now. So the use case that I'm going to talk to you about is I have this dashboard that you see in front of you. It's essentially a cleanup dashboard, which is related to another problem that I see a lot of our customers facing, which I'll just briefly touch on, which is to do with junk content accumulating. So if you have self-service, then people will self-serve and they will build stuff. So to help, I guess, prevent that self-service from getting out of control, we can deploy these dashboards. If you need these dashboards, just ask. You can ask your AE or CSM, and we can deploy it out to your instance. But this dashboard, for example, it shows the content that your users have created, and most importantly, it highlights the inactive content. So this is one of the dashboards that we use for keeping track of that. And the great thing about this particular dashboard is that you can deliver this dashboard directly to your content creators. You run PDP along it, row level security, then they can only see their stuff. And then they can use this table down below to find out exactly what's inactive to go and clean up. So the challenge that we're going to address today is how do we then deliver this dashboard to our developers in a sort of easy and sort of sustainable way. So everyone knows that you can share content up on top right using the little share button, and you can sort of type in your people and they'll come up and you can share them one at a time. That's sort of like the the quick and the dirty way of doing it. Because if you share content like this, what happens if your developers like leave the organization, or a new developer joins the organization and they need to be added? You'd have to sort of go in and add them manually. That could become a time-consuming process and a difficult process to stay on top of. So we're going to be looking at how you can share content with groups instead, to reduce the administration workload. Well, that's one of the things we're going to be looking at. So in order for us to get to the point where we can share this content with groups, it's probably important that we start by talking about your users, and how you bring users into Domo. So if you click on the Rubik's Cube for more and then go to the wrench for admin, you'll end up on the admin screen. So what we're interested in, first of all, is people. So if we click on this, I'll just hit the refresh. Okay, so here we can see a list of all of the users in your instance. Each employee in your instance should have a named account that belongs to them. And as you can see, I've got a fair list of people here. And on the screen, you can see some high-level information about that user, such as their name, their role, their title, and some other attributes, and so on and so forth. So when you want to add users to your instance, there's a couple of ways that you can do that. The first way is that you can just click on the Add New Person button, and you can type in their name, type in their email, select the role that you want them to take, and then you would hit invite. I'm not going to hit invite in this case, but this is what I would describe as a very manual and time-consuming process, and certainly not the sort of thing that you'd want to be doing on a regular basis to invite people into Domo. So there are alternative options for you. The next option is to use the bulk import. I would say that this is, in terms of administration workload, this would be like the next level in terms of a reduction in workload. So with the bulk import, you can import a data set that includes all of the users that you want to bring into your Domo instance. And you can also assign their attributes. And we'll talk a bit more about attributes in a moment. So the bulk import, it does come with an example which you can download that has all of the fields that you'll need to use with your bulk import. If you want a bit of help in terms of understanding the fields or columns that you need to use, then you can click on the help button there, and it'll list the different columns and the column types and values and so on and so forth. Something I will highlight here is that if you're using this to invite a lot of people into your instance, you may want to, depending on how your organization works, you may or you may not want to actually send an invite out to them. I have a rather embarrassing story where I used the bulk import to invite a whole bunch of people into a Domo instance, about like 900 people, and I forgot to put false on this particular field, and I just spammed like everyone in the company, inviting them to my instance. So I would think, just think about how many people you want to send the invite out to if you are using this mechanism for bringing people in. So those are like the first two ways in which you can bring your users into Domo. The most efficient way, though, to bring your users into Domo will be to integrate into your organization's single sign-on. And it's quite easy to do that. If you click on authentication, you'll see that we have two options for your single sign-on. We can use OpenID Connect and SAML. I expect that most customers will probably be using SAML. So we have a wizard that you can use. It's very easy to connect. So I'm on the single sign-on screen here. If I click Start Setup and then the wizard will walk you through the process of how to set up your single sign-on. And as you can see, we support quite a few identity providers to integrate in with. I think that you should be able to find the single sign-on provider that you need from the list there. So this is definitely my recommended way of administering your users and bringing your users into Domo. The way that it works is that if you're connected to your single sign-on, so if Domo is connected to your single sign-on, then the first time that a user logs into Domo from your single sign-on, their account or their user will be created and then will automatically inherit or bring in your user's attributes. as well as any directory groups that you may have configured within your identity provider. So I'm going to return to the people screen, because there's one last thing I wanted to talk about here. So if I go down to, for example, this HR developer, and I click on them, I can see their more information about this particular user. So I can see some of their details, like their name, email, so on and so forth. I can see the title, which will be relevant later on, their department. These, by the way, are attributes that I have manually selected and entered it, sorry, manually entered in this case, but these attributes can be inherited from your identity provider. You can also see that under company details, we've got the individual's role and then various other attributes. It is possible to edit a user's role if you click on the edit button, and then you can either select them from a drop-down of something that you've pre-entered, or you can type in a new value if there isn't one applicable for you there. Like consulting, for example, you would create a new one. So these are quite important. The attributes especially are very important for how we use groups, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later on. But what I wanted to talk about next is roles. So you can manage your roles by clicking on the little roles tab, and then that'll take you to this screen here. So roles define what your users can do in Domo. If we sort of think about it, the base level of access, the lowest level of access that a user can have in Domo is just to view cards that have been shared with them. So yeah, if no cards are being shared with the user, then there's almost nothing they can do in Domo. But roles increase the level of access and what your employees can do within Domo. So there are 5 default roles that come out of the box with Domo. That's admin, privileged, editor, participant, and social. And you can also see that we have a whole bunch of what we call custom roles. I'll come to those in a moment. So these 5 roles are broadly applicable for most of our customers. I would say that most of your users are probably going to be participants, and a participant is just someone who comes in and looks at dashboards, like we would call them a content consumer. You may have a limited number of editors. Editors would be your users who are tasked with creating content. You may have some privileged users, but to be honest, the difference between a privileged user and an editor is not really very much. For most customers, the only difference is that privileged users can add new users and edit groups. And then you see we have admins. So you'll probably have a few admins in your instance. Really, best practice would recommend that you have as few admins as possible, because admins have access to everything in your instance. So we'll come back to admin in a moment, but I just wanted to talk about custom roles. So I have a list here of custom roles. We allow you to create any sort of role that you want. You can do that by clicking the new role button up here on the top right. Doing so, you'll be tasked with selecting a role to base it off, and you can select any role that already exists. And then you can name your role and give it a description. We see many of our customers use custom roles. A common use case could be that you want to create a role that can create and edit cards, but can't create and edit data sets and data flows. So that would be kind of like a modification on the editor role. Another common example that we see would be an administrator who is tasked with administering groups, adding new users to Domo, but doesn't actually have access to any content. That would be like for security purposes. But I did want to just dive into the admin really quickly and talk about what's going on in here. So thinking back to what I said about how the basic, like the lowest level of access in Domo is just being able to view cards that are being shared with you. And the roles increase upon that. The way that roles do increase the level of access in Domo is through grants, what we call grants. So a grant is a discrete access level, I guess, that gives you access to a specific part of Domo. And you see, as you can see, there's a fair amount of granularity to the control of the grants. Because this is a default role, I can't actually like make any changes here. But if this was a custom role, then you can select whichever grants you want. I think at this point, it's very important that we highlight these grants that have the little caution sign next to them. And if I do mouse over it, you can see that it is a high security grant. So admins have access to all of the high security grants because they have access to everything. But if you're creating custom roles, then I would really recommend that you either don't give access to any of these high security grants, or you're very careful in how you grant access, in how you enable these sort of high security grants, because there's a fair amount of risk in who has access to these. I'll sort of highlight some of those in a moment. So if we move down, we sort of start off with some of the administrative stuff, administrative grants. And here we have cards and pages. So if you have someone who's going to be creating cards and pages, you'll definitely want to give them the edit cards grant and the edit pages grant, but you probably don't want to give them the manage all cards, pages, and data apps grant, because this grant is what gives them access to all of the cards and pages in your instance. Moving down, under data, we have a similar idea. We have edit datasets, which is the grant that allows your users to create and edit datasets. We also have a managed datasets grant, which allows them access to all datasets in your instance. Let's have a bit of a refresh there. Moving back down, similar sort of thing for edit data flows. So this is a grant that allows your users to create and edit data flows, which is probably okay for most of your editors, but you definitely don't want to give them the managed data flows grant, because then they can go and manage and edit any data flows that exist. Generally speaking, the default roles, I think, will give your users everything that they'll need. I guess there are a few specific grants here. And I also will just highlight that in this particular instance, this is my Domo instance, and then maybe you may be looking at the list of grants and saying, well, why don't I have access to that one? Like, why don't I have access to Adrenaline Data Flows, that grant? So Adrenaline Data Flows is a premium, I guess, premium data transformation tool. Not all of our customers need it, but if, for example, you do have Adrenaline Data Flows turned on, but you don't want all of your users to be transforming data using Adrenaline Data Flows, then you can come here and you can disable this grant. They won't be able to use Adrenaline Data Flows, but they will still be able to use Magic ETL to transform their data. I think moving down, there's not really much else to talk about, provided you're sticking to the default roles. They should give you everything that you need. Yeah. So that's I guess a high-level view of the roles. Obviously, roles are very important, especially when it comes to the problem, which the foundational problem here, which is around users creating content in your instance. If you are having issues with too many users creating content, then you may want to look at downgrading some of those users, or certainly training those users in how they can perhaps look after themselves in terms of deleting the content that they're creating but not using. But if you would like to downgrade their level of access, then a participant as a role would probably be a good level for them. So that's people and roles. As I mentioned, you can modify people's roles from the people screen. So I'll just quickly show you again how you do that. So here, if I click on edit, under role, I can change their role, and then save that. Also, when you add new people into the instance, you choose the role that they come in at. Okay, so we talked about users and roles. We also briefly touched on attributes. I wanted to go back and talk about attributes a little bit more, because we're almost at groups and they're going to become very important in groups. So right in front of us here, we can see some of the attributes that the users in my instance have. Title, department are sort of like two of the main attributes here. So these attributes define the level of access that I want my users to have in this instance, aside from, of course, their role, but also the department is a reflection of the department that they exist in within the organization. So I want to actually use this developer title in a moment to define what we call a dynamic group. So I'll talk a little bit more about dynamic groups in a moment. But before we do that, we first need to enable the attribute for use in dynamic groups. So if you click on the Attributes tab, you come to the Attributes Management screen. This is, by the way, this is a new screen, a new sort of layout. We changed some things with custom attributes. So if this doesn't look familiar to you, that would be why. So here we have a list of all the attributes that the users in the instance have. What I'm interested in is whether or not the attribute is managed. So if I just put my mouse over the little I sign, then it says that for managed attributes, the attribute values can only be managed by trusted sources. And this is important because only managed attributes can be used for dynamic groups and dynamic PDP, which are essentially security functions and security ways in which your data is delivered out to your users. So you don't want users to be able to come in and change their attributes if they're managed. That might give them access to stuff they shouldn't be seeing. So in order to enable the management of this particular attribute, which we're going to be using title in this case, you can see that it currently isn't managed. If we go across to the pencil over on the right-hand side and hit Edit, you'll see that we have the little option down here to make it managed. And this is a little caution thing, just indicating that once we turn this on, any administrators can really change these attributes. So we'll save that. And then we can check that because there's a little tick there. So once again, now that this attribute is managed, it means that we can use it in dynamic groups and dynamic PDP. So let's talk about groups. So I can navigate to the Groups tab by just clicking Groups. And then just give it a moment to load. So here we have a list of all of the groups that are in my instance. I have a fair few, as you can see. And in order to create a new group, I do that up on the top right by selecting New Group. So I guess going back to the problem at hand, I want to deliver this cleanup dashboard to the content creators. In this case, I know the content creators are the users who are my developers. So I have a HR developer, a finance developer, and a sales developer, I think. So these individuals all have the title of developer, so I can use that as a way of configuring dynamic group. But before I do that, I would just like to talk about the closed group and an open group. So closed groups and open groups are groups that the membership is sort of manually defined. It's manually defined by an administrator in your instance or someone who has the ability to administer groups. You have a closed group, which is a group where only the owner can invite other members. So really, this is good for sensitive content. And then you have an open group, which is where any member of the group can invite other members. So you definitely don't want to have this group for sensitive information, because anyone could accidentally share it with someone who shouldn't have access to that data. So I'll just quickly show you what a closed group looks like for the configuration. So if I select closed group, it's just going to load up a list of the users. And if, for example, I wanted to just bring in my developers, if I click on develop, the search for developer under title, then this brings up the 3 developers that I would want to add to this particular group. As I mentioned, it is a manual process. I would still have to select them individually, and then every time a new developer joins my organization, or one of these developers moves into a different team, then I'd have to come in and manually remove them. It's just like a time-consuming process, and it's another task that we don't want our administrators to have to worry about. So in this case, I would recommend that we don't use a this sort of group, and instead we should use a dynamic group. So with dynamic groups, rather than membership being just being like manually selected, you instead define membership by adding set criteria. So if I click on the little criteria box, then I get this drop down, and you can see that straight away we have the managed attributes that have already been configured in this instance. So the managed attribute that I want to use in this case is title, and then if I select title, then the values that already exist come up. So I want to use a developer title, and I'll hit apply. And if I just click here again, you'll see that there are other managed attributes. So I can define criteria as being sort of any combination of various managed attributes, or if I change this little drop down to an all, then it can be the intersect of the criteria that I'm using here. But in this case, the only criteria that I'm interested in is the developer criteria. So then if I hit next, you get the option to choose an avatar if you want to, but I'm fine with that one. And then here we have the owners. So by default, the user, the person who creates the group will be the owner, and also there is a setting to make it so that it's getting a bit confusing here, but essentially anyone who has the this is a group, right? So anyone who's in the group of the grant for manage all groups is also an owner of this group. Essentially, what this means is that if you have the manage all groups grant, then you can modify this data set. I would recommend that you leave it there. You can, of course, remove it, but that might make it difficult to change these groups in the future. So we'll hit next, and then save, and then it'll take you to the group that you've just created. And then there you go. So the membership of this group was defined by users who have the title of developer, and then it's brought in my 3 developers, my finance, my HR, and my sales developer. So now in the future, when new users come in from my single sign-on and they have the title of developer, they'll automatically be added to this group. You don't have to worry about manually adding them. And also, if a user's title changes, they move to a different role, then they'll automatically be removed from this group, so that their access to any content that has been shared with this group will be removed. So these I guess open, closed, and dynamic groups. These are the easiest groups to use and are available out of the box for you. I would really recommend that you use dynamic groups wherever possible. But in the event that you don't have any attributes available to you, and there could be a couple of reasons. It could be that you don't have a single sign-on, for example, and you don't want to go in and add everyone's title. It could be that you do have a single sign-on, but the attributes that are coming in from your single sign-on may have spelling mistakes or maybe inconsistent, and so that they're not usable in dynamic groups. So an alternative that we have available for configuring groups is in the governance toolkit. And I will say right now that the governance toolkit is predominantly a premium feature, which does have an additional cost to use. But it is designed for customers who need the specific functionality that isn't provided in the product out of the box. So just to reiterate, dynamic groups should definitely be your go-to. They're definitely the easiest to use and the best groups to use. But if you don't have attributes available, then the governance toolkit could be an option for you to consider. So the tool. So just quickly talking about the governance toolkit, it's comprised of a set of tools that each provide a set governance functionality for Domo. As you can see, there's quite a lot of them. I think we have about 11 of them. One of the tools is available for free. That's the schema management tool. And this, so if you want access to this tool, speak to your AE or CSM. Essentially, this tool allows you to modify an existing schema or data set within Domo, such as eliminating the rows in it, or cloning it, or changing the field names in it, without first having to run it through a data flow, for example. So very useful tool. This one is available out of the box. Speak to your CSM. the tool, the tool that we want to look at today is the group management tool. So this is a premium tool, and this tool is used to create groups from a data set. So you see, I already have one, what we call a job here. This is the sales group management job, but I want to create a new job for the developers. Obviously, we have the dynamic group that already works, but I just want to show you quickly an alternative if you don't have that, if you don't want to use the attributes. So I'm going to click on the new job button, and here we have the job configuration screen. So I'll call this one developers, just give it a name. So at the top, you can see some of the vital information for the job, including, importantly, the owner, and that is disabled. Obviously, it's never been run before because it's just being configured now for the first time. So for job option, with this one, you have two options. You can manage groups and you can manage landing pages. Managing landing pages is very useful if you want to set specific landing pages for your users to go to within Domo. And a landing page, by the way, is any page within Domo. But here we want to use the manage groups option. So if we select manage groups, and then now we need to select a data set that we want to use. So here's one I created earlier. It's just a data set with the group and the users. I'll show you what it looks like in a moment after I save this job. I think it's important here just to say that because we're using a data set to define the group membership, really, like in Domo, that means that your options are sort of unlimited for how you configure what goes into that data set. Because any sort of complex business logic can quite easily be captured within a data flow. You can use any of the Domo stats data sets as inputs for those data flows to very carefully craft who goes into those groups. You could, of course, use external data coming in from like an Excel spreadsheet that you've uploaded into Domo, or we can directly tap into your identity provider, such as Okta, by using the Okta connector that we have available. So really, there's a lot of options for you here. In this case, I'm just going to create a closed group. I'm going to run this on this instance, but for those of you who have multiple instances, the governance toolkit can remotely access and run jobs on other instances, which is very useful. Now, for reporting, every single tool in the governance toolkit will give you a data set output that indicates what's happened, what's run, and how the job ran. And that will be output into a data set. So in this case here, I'm just going to be calling it developer logs for toolkit. And then you can also email, add a list of users who you want to receive emails when the job runs. But in this case, I'm not going to use that. So if we click submit, that will then save. Oh, an error has occurred. It's interesting. Let's see if that actually did save or not. Oh, that is interesting. Okay, well, let's quickly see if we can get it to work. Okay. Cool. You know, these things, you know, you test it and you trial it beforehand, but you always get these errors occurring when it comes time to do the actual session. So new data set, let's just call it developer logs 2. All right, so once I've missed something here, which is entirely possible, manage groups, let's change that to open, current instance, new data set. Okay. All right, who knows what happened there, but we're good now. So if I open the job up again, I can go to the configuration data set by just clicking on it. And in this case, the configuration data set, it has a very simple schema. The schema is just the user. So this is the user ID, and then the group that you want that user to belong to. So let's go back to the toolkit and go back. So I'm going to run this. In order to run this job, I enable it, and then on the wrench, I click Run Job. Also, the job can be scheduled to run whenever, or rather, the job is scheduled to run whenever the configuration data set runs. So if I just come back in here, whenever this, in this case, this will never run because it's just a web form. But if you're using a data flow output data set, then you can configure the job to run whenever that data flow runs, which can be extremely often, right? It can be like every 15 minutes or so. So there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to how often you can have these jobs running. So that job's run. If we return to the group screen, we should be able to see it. When it finishes loading, or I maybe just have to refresh the screen. Oh, there it was. Okay. Well, I'll just reload it anyway. So that group that I've just created will go into the group screen, and every time that job runs, it's going to have a look at the configuration data set again. It's going to see the users who may have been added or removed from that configuration data set, and then it'll change the group as needed. So yeah, this is the group that we've just created using the governance toolkit. Okay, cool. So now that we've created the group, and we've created it in two ways, using the dynamic groups or the governance toolkit, we can now share our dashboard with those users so that they can gain access to it. So if I return to the dashboard screen and I go to the dashboard that we want to share, which could be Domo report card or the Your Domo content, and we'll use Your Domo content because this is the one I showed at the beginning. So if I go up to the sharing button and I search for the group. So these are the groups that we have here down the bottom. You can tell that they are the groups because if you mouse over the icon, you'll see that it indicates that there's 3 people there. So if I add them in and then I share that, then you can see that those 3 users have been added. Those 3 users now have access to this dashboard. And now when they log in, they'll be able to come in here and have a look at this. So I think that's really the main points that I wanted to cover during this session. So just to recap really quickly, we've talked about how you can add users to your environment, 3 different ways that you can add users to your environment, either using the single inviting option, the bulk upload option, and the single sign-on option. We've also had to talk about user attributes, what's important about user attributes and how you can modify user attributes. Talked about roles, what's important about roles and how you can configure roles. And of course, we also talked about groups, the different ways in which you can configure groups, and then using groups to share a dashboard with a group of users. So if there are any questions at this stage, feel free to.
That's great, Carl. I just kind of let you go a little bit there. There were probably a few points I was going to jump in, but you were on a roll. I'd love to see these types of sessions because I do think they're so hands-on and they're so technical, especially folks that are setting up Domo for the first time or trying to just jump in and learn something new. I think you covered all the bases. So much, in fact, 0 questions. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? I definitely appreciate everybody joining us. We have lots of folks joining us, so thank you for watching. If you do have questions, always can reach out to me. I can get you in contact with our friend Carl, a great dude that is moving to the States. Newsflash, right? Or have you moved already?
I have moved. Yes, I have moved from Singapore to Salt Lake City.
Right. Yeah. So we have some folks here saying thank you so much, Carl. Thanks, Carl, from our good friend Daniel from YouTube. Thanks for joining us, Daniel. Really appreciate that. Sounds like everybody got what they needed, which is the best part about doing these Domo Lunch and Learns. Again, thank you, Carl. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will see you on the next one. Trying to put together the Thursday one quick. Eric from YouTube says, that was great, Carl. Very thorough. So if you have any questions, again, you can reach out to me or reach out to Carl. We hope to catch you on Thursday, but if we don't, we will be back on the following Tuesday. I'm dealing with a little something, a little bit of an ear infection, a little bit of sinus issues. So trying my best to get through these this week, but hopefully back to full strength next week, and we can continue to provide you these lunch and learns. Thanks everybody for joining us. We can catch you in the community, or we'll catch you on the next Domo Lunch and Learn. Thanks again, Carl. Really appreciate it.